I see the room is filling up, so I will give it just a minute before I get started here. We had over 650, close to 700 people register for today's webinar, so I just want to let Zoom fill the room before I give out any of the info. Please take a look at today's agenda. This was shared out for those who registered, and it will show the content that we're going to be going over today. And it looks like our room is evening out. Maybe give it just a couple more minutes here. Okay, it looks like we're kind of stabilizing. So, hey, everybody, thank you for coming today. I know that this could have, there's a lot of people that we're trying to accommodate here. So this time worked for some and not for others. We are going to be offering a second webinar in the evening, sometime in mid-November for anyone who wasn't able to make it. And we are also recording today's webinar so that we can circulate it afterwards. But if you are here, that means you are in some way affected by the WEP, the Windfall Elimination provision, and the GPO, the government pension offset, both two penalties, we like to call them, are parts of Social Security. So today, we're going to be hearing from AFT's Meghan Stockhausen. She is assistant director, perhaps, in our government relations department. She knows the legislative side of this issue inside and out. So she's going to give us kind of the state of play, and then we'll take some questions and move on to our other presenters. We have Alex Brown from NASRA on today, as well as Melanie Myers from AFT's research department. Roger Boudreau is joining us on behalf of the National Task Force to repeal the Windfall Elimination provision and government pension offset. And we also have Bernadette Aguirre on from the organizing department at AFT, as well as Chris Walkup, who's our indispensable assistant and helps everything here run smoothly. So thank you all for coming again. I know this is an issue that's important to so many of our members. So I'm going to kick it over to Meghan to get started.
Hey, Calvin. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with everyone today and to get a chance to update you on WEP GPO. First off, just for some table setting, I want to tip my hat to Roger and so many of the folks who've engaged in activism over the last year on this issue. This year we've really seen WEP GPO activism drive momentum on this issue. For those of you who are impacted by WEP GPO, you know that it's been an issue since the Reagan administration. This has been a burden for retirees who spent their career or portions of their career in public service for an incredibly long time. But over the last year, we've really had a tremendous amount of effective activism and advocacy, to the point where the bill HR 82, which would fully repeal WEP GPO. That bill has had over 300 Republican and Democratic sponsors in the House. The co-sponsorship level of a bill generally indicates its level of support. And so getting over 300 co-sponsors is generally unprecedented. So that activism has been noted. People on the Hill see the issue, and they know that the issue is not going to go away until something's done. So I really just want to applaud those of you who've engaged and reached out to your member of Congress and your senator. So that said, I'm going to go through kind of what the state of play is at the moment. So through the fall, we had a constant drumbeat through the summer and the fall, you had a constant drumbeat of members of Congress in the House of Representatives adding their name to the long list of co-sponsors for HR 82. So what happened was it didn't look, the committee, the House committee, which deals with Social Security, is the House Ways and Means Committee. And it is kind of up to them whether they take a bill and mark it up and then return it back to the House for a full House vote. What ended up happening, and you do not see this a lot, it's incredibly rare. The co-sponsors of this bill, Rodney Davis from Illinois and Representative Spanberger from Virginia, they pushed a discharge petition. So that's a procedural move that would have forced a full House vote and bypassed committee. This almost never happens. And in order for it to happen, a bill has to spend a certain number of days on the legislative calendar. Not to get into too many details, but the discharge petition almost forced a floor vote. What happened instead, a few days before that floor vote would have been forced, was that the House Ways and Means Committee decided to take the bill and bring it to markup. Usually going to markup is a really good step and means that you'll go to a full floor vote. Unfortunately, some of the politics in the House Ways and Means Committee led to a situation where the bill wasn't recommended for a full floor vote. However, it passed the House Ways and Means Committee and could still, in the lame duck, come to a full floor vote. Not to drown in those details, but we have a situation where the committee that is tasked with looking at bills that relate to Social Security is headed by Richie Neal from Massachusetts and Representative Brady from Texas. Both men really want to come to a compromise package, reforming WEP, but not repealing WEP GPO. So what we've been told is that after the election, Chairman Neal and ranking member Brady, who's about to retire at the end of this Congress, we've been told that they will get back to work and try to put forward a compromise bill. So that is basically where things stand at the moment. You have a bill that could go for a full floor vote, which we would love, or you have two very influential members of Congress that could be pushing their own reform package. So moving forward, knowing that that's kind of where our state of play is, the AFT is engaged in a lot of advocacy over the last 6 months, really letting House leadership know how much we want to see a vote on the full repeal of WEP GPO. The AFT, along with AFSCME and NEA, has met with Speaker Pelosi's senior staffers and explained how focused we are on the issue, how overdue relief is, how many folks around the country that are impacted, particularly retirees in California. And we've also stressed that this is an important issue, especially in an election year. So the speakers certainly heard our priorities loud and clear when it comes to WEP GPO. We've also reached out to Secretary Cardona. The Secretary of the Department of Education is actually a former Connecticut educator, so he's very, very well acquainted with WEP GPO. And we've reached out to him, updated him on the AFT's campaign to repeal WEP GPO, and basically urged him to get involved in this fight because of the dire impact that WEP GPO provisions are having on districts' ability to recruit and retain teachers in the midst of a teaching shortage. So I'm seeing some questions pop up in the chat, which is fantastic. We really appreciate these questions. The compromise bill, so you kind of have two, you have Brady on the Republican side, who in the past has pushed compromises that the AFT definitely wasn't in a position to endorse. His compromises had blanket WEP, like a blanket amount of WEP relief that I believe was around $100 a month that would go to each impacted retiree. So we obviously thought that wasn't generous enough. And there was also a fear with Brady's the reform proposals Ranking Member Brady's pushing, that they would pull more people into WEP GPO. So those are the concerns we have with the Brady package. Chairman Richie Neal from Massachusetts, his ideas around reform have typically been more generous, and they've also held people harmless. If you're one of the few people that maybe would be hurt by a reform package, it says that nobody will be negatively impacted by a reform package. So, we certainly have found that Neal's ideas around reform have been much more positive than Brady's. What a compromise package would look like, we don't have the details yet. They haven't released a scheme of what, or an outline of what any compromise would look like. And it seems like they're pretty far apart on some of the core components of what the compromise would look like and how to fund it. Okay, so let's see. So I'm just looking through the questions, and I so appreciate this engagement. Okay, President Biden has been, it's just a reminder to everybody, I think it's easy to lose track of. President Biden has been absolutely fabulous on WEP GPO. In 2019, even before we were in the throes of, general campaign season, he called for the full elimination of WEP GPO. So we have an ally in the White House without doubt. Let's see here. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So, also important to remember, while most of my updates focused on the House of Representatives, we definitely have to think about our Senate strategy for dealing with WEP GPO. We are incredibly lucky that Senator Sherrod Brown is the lead sponsor on the Senate version of the bill to repeal WEP GPO. He's absolutely committed, committed to this bill, and at the AFT we we're regularly meeting with his staffers and have open lines of communication with them. They know that we're an ally on this and that we're committed to this. In terms, let's see here, I want to make sure I'm getting all these questions. Oh, we have a great question about what folks can do to help. So we would love to, engage, have your activism, engaging members of Congress on this issue. We have a petition to Speaker Pelosi, urging her to bring the full repeal of WEP GPO to the floor. So that's, signing that, sharing that with friends and family. AFT petitions aren't limited to AFT members. So the more people we can get on AFT's petition, the better. And then in terms of outreach to members of Congress, I think it's really important to stress that not only do we care about WEP GPO, we also care about making sure that Social Security is strengthened and expanded. I think that sometimes we're very focused on the details of WEP GPO, and we forget that the other side, Republicans are very, very eager, if the elections go their way in 2 weeks, to hurt the whole Social Security system. So we have to, be just forthright in our commitment to protecting and expanding Social Security, and making sure that folks know that that we believe in the Social Security system and we want to see it protected. And then so these questions are coming up.
Megan, I can help you out a little bit here.
Okay.
So one of the questions was, is Speaker Pelosi a co-sponsor of the bill, which I believe she is?
She's not. So she typically doesn't co-sponsor many bills at all, unless it's really rare for her to co-sponsor. So that's not, I wouldn't worry about that too much, because she usually doesn't weigh in that way.
Got it. And then a couple people are asking how many states are affected and why are only certain states affected? So
this kind of goes back to the history of the Social Security system. Most states, the Social Security law allows for public servants to be covered by Social Security. And most states, when they, in the early days of Social Security or a little bit later, they said, you know what, we want our public employees also covered by Social Security. So whether it's through they call them Section 218 agreements, or through other mechanisms in the law, those states have said, you know, our public employees are coming under Social Security. You've had a handful of roughly 15 states that have said no. You know, like our state employees will be covered by their pension system, and they will not be paying into Social Security. We also have a handful of states, Rhode Island, Georgia, Kentucky, where it varies by school district. So that can be incredibly confusing. Some school districts have their employees pay into Social Security, some school districts don't. If a school district or a state wanted to have their employees covered by Social Security, there is a process for them to do that. Our members in Puerto Rico are in the midst of that process, where they will be going into the Social Security system.
Great. And so I think to keep us on track with the schedule here, we're
Sure.
a couple minutes over. So keep your questions coming, and we will answer anything that we weren't able to answer afterwards, or if we have time at the end. Megan, if you're able to stay on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
The one question I saw that I think has a quick answer is that will current retirees be affected by this if WEP and GPO repeal is passed?
Yes, they would be.
Yeah, so if you're currently impacted, it would not get you a backlog of pay that has already been withheld, but you would no longer have that removed from your benefit.
Yeah, and if reform proposals were passed, current retirees would also be impacted by those.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So thank you, Megan. If you're able to hang around until the end, we may have a chance to answer some more of these questions at the end, but I do want to move on. So,
Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for all of that information. I know this is a very complicated and personal issue for a lot of people. And so, at the heart of the WEP and GPO issue is retirement security, right? And being able to have a secure retirement. So we've Alex Brown from NASRA is on. He's going to talk a bit about some other components about retirement security that do play in with the WEP and GPO. So he's going to give us a COLA update. And I just wanted to give Alex a brief introduction, and just lost my sheet here. I will have it up in just a second. Apologies, everybody. So Alex is the research manager with the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, NASRA. In his role, he collects and distributes data and information covering a wide range of topics pertinent to public retirement system administration policy. He's also co-authored briefs and papers on topics such as employer and employee pension contributions, hybrid retirement plans, and pension reform. He has also discussed pension issues in front of state legislature, public pension boards of trustees, professional associations, and other stakeholders. Prior to joining NASRA, Alex worked for the Center for State and Local Government Excellence and the International City County Management Association, focusing on pension and retiree healthcare issues. He holds a BS from James Madison University and an MPP from George Mason University. So Alex, take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to use slides to support my remarks that I'm attempting to share here. Trust you all can see the title slide. Please let me know if you can't. Appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to address this group this afternoon. Just to continue the background, a little bit more about my association. NASRA, or the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, is a professional association for the executive directors of the nation's largest state and local public employee retirement systems. And as Calvin mentioned, I represent the research office. One of our key areas of focus is plan design. So tracking plan designs in use in the public sector and changes to those plan designs, including to COLAs. And so that's going to be the focus of my remarks here to you this afternoon, with a particular focus on COLA issues affecting participants of public pension plans that are not covered by Social Security. So most of the material I'm going to share with you this afternoon is in our COLA issue brief, NASRA issue brief, cost of living adjustments. This is our foundational COLA resource. We use this resource to describe the purpose for COLAs, different COLA plan designs, changes to those plan designs, and the issue brief also includes an appendix identifying the current COLA provisions, as well as any recent changes for a sample of over 100 of the largest state and local employee pension plans. This resource is updated annually and posted to our website, nasra.org. This is would be a good resource to become familiar with, including subsequent iterations as we update it to reflect changes moving forward. So before I get into the COLA background and current issues, I like to start with this overview slide identifying public retirement plan stakeholders and their objectives, because COLAs are sort of a very narrow issue of public pension plan design, but they fit into a sort of a broader context of public pensions. And these pensions exist for a reason, and that reason is to meet the objectives of their stakeholders. And so who are the public pension plan stakeholders and what do they want? Well, the stakeholders are identified here on this slide: public employees, public employers, that would be state and local governments, school districts, police departments, fire departments, any public employer, and then taxpayers, or in other words, recipients of public services. And so what do these stakeholders want out of the pension plan? Well, in general, public employees, and this is an inexhaustive list, but sort of a representative example of stakeholder interests. Public employees, generally want a competitive compensation package that includes a retirement benefit component. They want to be able to be promoted in their career and eventually to retire at an appropriate age for their profession. And then they want financial security in retirement. And I would add to that an element for inflation protection to preserve the purchasing power of that benefit. Public employers want to attract and retain a qualified workforce. They want a return on investment in employee training. It costs a lot to hire and train an employee. They want to get something back in return for that investment that they're making. And they want, to facilitate the orderly progression of personnel, including retirement at an age appropriate time. And then taxpayers, they want public services that are provided by qualified professionals in a reliable and cost-efficient manner, and at a stable and predictable cost over time. And, it sounds simple enough, to just sort of list these here. But as I'm sure you all know, these objectives are at times complementary with one another, and at other times they are competing with one another. You could have a pension plan that offers wildly out of market benefits, and that would be great for public employees, but it would be pretty bad news for public employer budgets and for tax rates, I'm sure, as well. So this is the challenge. This is the challenge that plan sponsors are trying to balance is how to best satisfy these at times complementary, at times competing stakeholder objectives. And so as the conversation about COLAs proceeds, try to think about it in context of that. So a little bit of background on COLAs. COLA, cost of living adjustment, is intended to offset to some extent, either partially or fully, the effect of inflation on a pension benefit. Inflation, as we all know and are experiencing these days, erodes the purchasing power of money. It reduces the amount of goods and services that an individual can afford with the same amount of money. And so that is definitely something that is affecting pension benefits, as well as incomes and every other form of money. COLA can add significantly to the value of the pension plan, but it also does carry a cost, and sometimes that cost can be significant. Our issue brief identifies that depending on the characteristics of the COLA, the additional cost to the benefit for having that plan feature could be anywhere between 11 and 30% or so, depending on the COLA design. COLAs for most public pension plans were established in the mid-1970s and early 80s in response to the high inflation associated with that period. But not every pension plan provides an automatic COLA. Some plans only provide what is known as an ad hoc COLA, which requires an active approval from a governing body, such as a retirement board or a legislature. COLAs are particularly important for public employees who do not participate in Social Security. This is because their pension benefit may be the only form of retirement income that they have, and may be the only form of inflation protected retirement income that they have, compared to retirees who retire from a pension plan where their government service was also covered by Social Security. They're probably getting some form of inflation protection on their Social Security benefit, which lessens the importance of the COLA on their public pension benefit, because they've got inflation protection on another form of retirement income that they're receiving. Meghan gave a great overview of why some state and local governments are outside Social Security. And I can add to that by identifying that approximately 25% of public employees nationwide are outside Social Security. This is a figure that includes approximately 40% of public school teachers, about 2/3 of public safety officers, as well as substantially all public employees in a handful of states. So this graphic is one that we include in our COLA issue brief, and this is sort of getting to the issue why it's important to have a COLA on a retirement benefit. This chart is showing the impact of 20 years of inflation on the purchasing power of a hypothetical $25,000 pension benefit. So $25,000 is the value of the individual's pension benefit in this example, and we're showing the impact over 2 decades based on 2 different hypothetical rates of inflation. Well, one hypothetical, one actual rate of inflation. And so what we're showing here is that even if inflation is very low, such as indicated on the blue line, 1.5% annually over 20 years, it still pretty significantly reduces the purchasing power of that benefit, falls to looks like just over $18,000 or so from $25,000 over the 20-year period. Then when we contrast that to the actual annual rate of inflation, we can see, and as we'll look at it in greater detail moving forward, inflation has been pretty low, below 1.5% in some years and around that level in other years. So the lines kind of track each other. But then you see, as we get to the end of this period, the line takes a real sharp downward turn, and that reflects the significantly higher inflation levels that we've been experiencing in the most recent 2 years, especially the most recent year. And you can see that the purchasing power benefit based on the actual rate of inflation is significantly lower than the hypothetically low rate of inflation. So this is basically the reason why these COLAs are provided, is to offset this effect on individuals' pension benefits. Our issue brief also identifies common COLA types. As I briefly mentioned previously, automatic COLAs are granted independent of any action. They're just automatically included as part of the pension plan design. And we compare that with ad hoc COLAs, which require an active approval, as I said, typically by a retirement board or state legislature. COLAs can either also be simple or compound. A simple COLA is a COLA that's granted only on the amount of the original retirement benefit. And compare that to a compound COLA, which is granted on the amount of the original retirement benefit, as well as all previously granted increases. Inflation-based COLAs, performance-based COLAs, will cover that moving forward. Delayed onset or minimum age, some pension plans specify that you have to be retired for a certain number of years or have attained a certain age in order to be eligible to receive a COLA. Limited benefit basis, that refers to the amount of the benefit on which the COLA is applied. Some plans grant the COLA on the full retirement benefit. Other plans choose to limit the amount of the benefit that the COLA can be applied to, such as the first $20,000 in benefits, and then everything above that level doesn't get a COLA. Recent COLA trends, since 2009, many states have reduced, suspended, or eliminated COLAs in an effort to reduce liabilities and costs. There's been a lot of pension reform during this era. Pension reform is sort of a euphemism for benefit reductions. A lot of the pension reforms have affected new hires. So something like creating a new benefits tier, a new tier applied to new hires with lower benefits. A change like that, really just sort of adjusts the cost curve of the plan, because obviously those participants, not only are they're not receiving benefits yet, but they haven't even been hired yet. They're hypothetical hires only, they're new hires. Versus COLA reductions, those changes are affecting individuals who are already retired and receiving benefits. So the cost saving potential is significantly higher when you're talking about reducing COLAs for retirees than when you're talking about reducing benefits for new hires. And so that's why I think it's been a particularly attractive target for states to reduce retiree COLAs, because of the significant potential for cost savings. In fact, and I'm pretty sure this is accurate, prior to prior to 2009, no COLA change was made that affected current retirees. In 2010, 3 states enacted that change: Minnesota, South Dakota, and Colorado. Prior to that, I'm fairly certain that no state attempted to cut retiree COLAs. Those 3 states were immediately sued. I think Colorado took the longest for that lawsuit to become settled, but in all 3 states, the courts affirmed the state's rights to cut that benefit. In Colorado, I believe the ruling specified that retirees had a right to receive a COLA, just not a COLA in any specific amount. And so until recently, low inflation has protected many retirees against the impact of these COLA reductions. As we'll see moving forward, a big component of these reductions was to introduce a COLA cap that sort of set an upper ceiling on the amount that an annual COLA can reach. But as long as inflation has been lower than that cap, which it has been in virtually every case where there is a cap, that has lessened the effect of the COLA cuts on retirees. However, recent higher inflation has increased the focus on COLA adequacy as inflation has begun to exceed a lot of these COLA caps, and not by a small margin. So this is a map that we included in our issue brief identifying states that made changes to cost of living adjustments since 2009. And as you can see, COLA changes fell into one of 3 broad categories. You had changes affecting new hires only. Those are the states in green or teal. You had changes affecting current employees and new hires. Those are the states shaded in blue. And then you had changes affecting current retirees, and those are the states shaded in beige. And that's the overwhelmingly dominant group. And it's also worth mentioning that in all these cases, the changes flow down. So if retirees are getting their COLA cut, so are current employees and new hires. Same thing, if current active employees are getting their COLA cut, that's also affecting new hires. 33 states in total. And it's also worth mentioning that not every state provides an automatic COLA. So some of these states are not shaded in any color on this map, and that's because essentially they've got no benefit to cut. That includes Texas, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, North Dakota, and a handful of other states. So it's not that these, and in a lot of these states, they've got ad hoc COLAs only that require approval from an external body, and they haven't been granting COLAs, several of them, for a decade or longer. So it's not that these states are unaffected by COLA cuts. They're very much affected. It's just that they have no automatic COLA to cut and therefore are not candidates to be included on this map, but it is worth mentioning their situation. So the prevailing, the dominant COLA model in the public sector is a COLA that's based to some extent on inflation, as measured by the change in the consumer price index, the most popular and recognized metric for annual inflation. And in most cases, these inflation related COLAs are restricted to a specific percentage of the change, such as 1/2 of the annual change in CPI, and also possibly limited to a cap, such as not to exceed 3%. So in this arrangement, retirees bear the risk of inflation above the threshold or cap. If the cap is 3% and inflation is 5%, retirees have some exposure to inflation. You compare that to, if the plan's COLA policy was just that they're going to replace full CPI every year, like Social Security, then the employer would be taking on all the risk of higher inflation. If inflation is higher, they pay greater COLAs, but the retirees would be held harmless from the effects of inflation. So an inflation-based COLA with a restriction or cap is sharing among employers and retirees some of the risk or impact of higher inflation, and that's what's going on with this type of plan design. The advantage is that this will be a COLA that's mostly consistent with the purpose of the COLA, which is identified earlier, is to offset to some extent the effect of inflation. The COLA granted by this model is likely not going to be any higher than needed to offset against inflation. However, if inflation is higher, as it has been recently, the COLA is not going to fully offset the effect of inflation. Other types of COLA changes that we've seen in recent years, some plans provide COLAs that have a COLA whose provision or amount is dependent on external factors such as the pension fund's investment earnings or the actuarial condition of the pension plan. And so in, a plan with a COLA that's dependent on investment performance, COLAs may be paid generally or may be paid in higher amount when the investment earnings are higher, such as when they exceed a benchmark, such as the plan's actuarially determined assumed rate of investment return. In this model, COLAs may be infrequent if investment performance does not reach that level for several years. COLAs may be not granted or may be lower than they otherwise would be if those thresholds were being attained. And so they may be inconsistent with the purpose of the COLA to offset inflation, because we could still have inflation in those years despite the lower investment returns. And so this arrangement, in addition to subjecting retirees to the regular risk of inflation, they're also bearing to some extent some form of investment risk, because if investment performance is lower, they get a lower COLA. And I already talked about some of these other contingent or limited COLA features, such as COLAs applied to a portion of the pension benefit or delayed onset or minimum age requirement COLAs. I think if I could only present one chart on this issue in recent COLA trends, it would be this one. This is a chart we also include in the issue brief, identifying the 3-year rolling average change in CPI for a long period of time, 1950 to present. And we use the 3-year rolling average here because that kind of allows us to identify trends in inflation and smooth out the variance that we would otherwise observe if we were just plotting the annual change in inflation. And you can see, this first period I've circled here, 1975 to 1985 or so, highest rolling average inflation for this period. You had inflation, running at about 6.5% or significantly higher than that for this 10-year period. And this is consistent with the time period that I mentioned earlier, where most public pension plan COLAs were established. And I think, in fact, the Social Security COLA was established in 1975 in response to this inflation trend. And then this second period I've circled here is the most recent decade or so, which is a time period where we've had very comparatively low inflation, running below 2% in most of these years, and on average. And this is not coincidentally the period where you've seen a lot of COLAs cut. And then, of course, the big question here is whether this spike, here that we plot at the end of the period is going to be temporary or enduring. So I've included in my materials some examples of COLA provisions for non-Social Security plans. I probably don't have time to cover them all here in my opening remarks, but I do want to highlight a couple here with just a few minutes. Colorado and Maine are 2 examples of non-Social Security states that have made recent changes to their plan design to reflect principles of risk sharing, particularly through their COLAs. In Colorado, 2018 legislation in that state suspended the COLA for 2 years, and then thereafter tied payment of future COLAs to the plan's contribution adequacy. So they established thresholds for adequacy of the plan's contributions relative to the actuarially determined contributions that the plan's actuaries are recommending employers contribute to the plan to keep it sustainable over time. And so if the plan's actual contributions fall below 98% of the actuarially determined contribution rate, the COLA can be reduced by up to 1/4%, but there is a floor there of 0.5%. So even in the worst outcome, retirees in Colorado are still going to get a COLA of 0.5%. If the ratio increases, if the contributions of the plan are greater than 100% of the ADC, then the COLA can be increased. So there's some shared risk on the downside, and then there's some shared gain on the upside. And then similarly, in 2018, the Maine Public Employees Retirement System Board approved a plan for that system's participating local district, so local government local government employee plan, that established member and employer contribution rate maximums. And if those thresholds are exceeded, if the plan's actuarial condition or actuarial experience causes those contribution rate thresholds to be exceeded, COLAs can be reduced or frozen. And so what both of these states have done is tried to articulate in advance. So rather than just sort of capriciously deciding to meet and cut or freeze or eliminate COLAs, they're coming up with a model that tries to share risk equitably among employers, employees, and retirees, to articulate in advance the consequences of certain changes to the plan's contribution rates or actuarial funding condition that may adversely impact those groups in advance of the events that cause those actions to be implemented. And then I'd like to just skip ahead to briefly touch on ad hoc COLAs. So non-Social Security plans we observe are more likely to provide an automatic COLA than plans whose participants are covered by Social Security, but there are exceptions to this principle. And I would like to highlight 2 out of the 4 that I've listed here as examples. So Ohio is an interesting example. In 2012, the legislature granted the board authority to modify the COLA for retirees of those plans. So broadly speaking, pension plans in Ohio are required by state law to maintain a maximum unfunded liability amortization period of no more than 30 years. If the annual actuarial valuation identifies an amortization period in excess of that statutory threshold, the plans are required to take corrective action either to the contribution rates or to the benefits policy to restore compliance with that maximum 30-year amortization period. And so that has played out in those plans a couple times, affecting the 4 statewide public pension plans in Ohio. That has resulted most recently for the school employees retirement system and the state teachers retirement system to suspend or eliminate their automatic COLAs and replace them with discretionary COLAs or ad hoc COLAs. And then finally, Texas is probably the state with the largest teacher retirement system that does not have an automatic COLA. COLAs for retired Texas teachers are subject to legislative approval. And state law further requires that the plan's amortization period to be less than 31 years in order for a COLA to be approved. So sort of similar to Ohio, that there's an amortization, that everything kind of keys off the amortization period with respect to the provision of a COLA. And I'm going to wrap up there because I want to keep us on schedule, but I'd be happy to take your questions either now or at the end of the session.
Great, thank you so much, Alex. We had a couple questions come in. I think the main one was that people are interested in having these slides available to them. Is that something we can share with people?
Of course, I'm happy to share a copy of the presentation as well as a link to the issue brief on our website. Great,
I appreciate that. We can come back to some questions at the end. I wanted to go briefly to Melanie Myers, who's an Associate Director in AFT's Research and Strategic Initiatives Department, to give a little bit more information on how some AFT members and retired members have been involved with COLA pushes in Ohio. And then we will go to Roger and then take questions at the end. So Melanie, go right ahead.
Hi, folks. It's great to meet you. So yeah, I work in our Research and Strategic Initiatives Department at AFT. I work on our state legislative team, working on pension issues in states. And in part of that capacity, I sit on the board for AFT of the National Public Pension Coalition. So I work with many of our states who are fighting, defined benefit rollbacks. I also work with Roger and others on our AFT Trustee Council. So I'm happy to see all of you and be part of this conversation. I just wanted to share, Alex's presentation was great and chock full of lots of important information for all of you. The brief that he was speaking from is fantastic. Hopefully we can drop a link to that in the chat so you can all access it. I just wanted to talk briefly about, I know, COLAs touch all of us in so many ways. And my dad is a retiree in Ohio, so I get that personally as well. I've worked with our Ohio Federation of Teachers members in Ohio over the last number of years and sort of followed, their engagement around these issues. And I wanted to share a little bit of that here. If we have any members or retirees from Ohio, please announce yourself in the chat. I'd love to hear all of you, and hopefully I get your story right. I spoke to our folks at the Ohio Federation of Teachers to kind of capture a little bit of that, but would love to get your comments and thoughts as we go forward. So yeah, just say go Buckeyes in the chat or whatever. Nice to see you all. So as Alex mentioned, back in 2012, Ohio changed the legislature sort of made COLAs ad hoc. And for the Ohio teachers retirement system, the TRS system, the legislature sort of gave the pension board the authority to grant or not grant a COLA. And in 2017, during a time when the fund had serious funding challenges, they began conversations, STRS began conversations about whether to suspend the COLA. OFT strongly encouraged the system to hold regional meetings around the state to discuss the funding problems, the pension funds funding problems and options, including this potential COLA suspension. This was really the beginning of the retiree organizing work that happened in Ohio around this issue. And what I want to share a little bit is this like 5-year campaign that they have been, organizing retirees, engaging retirees at sort of every level in state legislation, at the pension fund, and also in retirement board seats as well. They've gotten involved in the sort of politics of that. So I want to just share a little bit of that, and hopefully we can get some, all of you Ohio retirees who are on the call, feel free to correct me if I get the record wrong. I wasn't directly involved, but I think this is such an important story. I just wanted to share it here as well. So from 2017 to 2020, OFT really helped organize members, especially retirees, to attend the monthly STRS board meetings. So your pension funds usually meet monthly. In Ohio, they weren't being live streamed. And so OFT worked with retirees to turn out, after it was announced that the COLA was going to be suspended. Obviously, you can imagine how retirees took that. And they started attending meetings. We had 20 to 30 retirees and members coming out to meetings every month. And there were 5 to 10 people who spoke at every meeting on the need to reinstate the COLA, to reduce employee contributions and years of service requirements, all of these are things that STRS had changed to help address its funding crisis. 2 of those frequent speakers are now board members on the fund. They've run for election to become a trustee of the fund, and now they're sitting on the board as well. Retirees started organizing organically, as well as, OFT providing space around this. They created Facebook groups to connect with each other, and really, this was very grassroots and very retiree driven. And, really, sort of engaged conversation among retirees and work to try to push for their COLA. All the while, OFT is bringing members to the board, sort of raising these concerns. Retirees are speaking out and getting more and more involved. OFT really felt that STRS was unresponsive to OFT and OFT members, and there were some transparency issues around investments and how decisions were made. They pushed for legislation to require the fund to live stream board meetings so that retirees wouldn't have to travel to the fund to be able to participate in or observe, the governance of their pension fund and ask questions. Because that's a big, that's obviously a big challenge for retirees who live in different parts of the state to get to the pension board meeting every month to weigh in. And so that is something that, as an interim part of this 5-year plan, they worked on and were able to make change. Obviously, COVID helped, in that space. But, one piece of the story, in Ohio, there are 2 unions who represent education employees, like in most of our states, right? OFT has only about 20,000 members versus about 100,000 members in Ohio who are part of OEA. And so while the pension board had seats for education employees, for participants and for retirees, none of those had been held by OFT members. And so OFT members felt like they really didn't have a voice and on the board. And now that the decision about getting a COLA is dependent on the board, that makes those positions even more important. They're always important, and our trustees, like many of the folks on this call, Roger, I know Sharon from CalSTRS is on the call as well. These people, these trustees, they make huge decisions. These are incredibly important roles that we as union members, actives, and retirees play. We don't always see how important they are, but I think OFT really got it. And so starting in 2020, OFT started to work to win representation. They were running candidates. In 2020, OFT ran Dale Price, who was an active member from Toledo. He was the top vote getter. He got 52% of the vote in that 2020 election. In 2021, OFT ran Rudy Fichtenbaum, who's an AAUP member and retired for the fund. He also won in 2021. And then in 2022, OFT ran 2 members as candidates. In March of 2022, as this election for STIR's board candidates is underway, STIR has actually voted to reinstate the COLA for 1 year, a one-time COLA for those retirees who retired before 2018. Some people speculate that this timing was not coincidental. I have no intelligence on that particular topic, but those OFT candidates ran and they won. Lots and lots of money was spent on this election, but after working with and organizing retirees for 5 years, OFT knew the messaging that resonated with actives and retirees. I think OFT only spent about $8,000 on this election, and we understand that OEA spent closer to $200,000 to $300,000 on this election, and OFT was able to win, having Elizabeth Jones represent retirees on the fund, and Julie Sellers, an active OFT member, represent actives on the fund as well. So through all of this sort of engagement around the COLA, it was really the COLA that generated the passion and engagement among retirees, but it's translated in lots of different spaces. Julie and Elizabeth and the other board members who OFT has helped get elected, they don't care just about the COLA. They care about ensuring that this fund is there to serve them and future generations of educators for the long term, right? They are long-term focused, and they bring that passion and attention to the board. And so they are, OFT continues to encourage retirees and actives to be engaged in the pension fund, and by doing that, they're building a bench. They're identifying people who care about these issues and helping them see that this is something that they can do, a way that they can give back and have a voice in their retirement and in the future of all members. Because as Alex mentioned earlier, the quality of the retirement benefit affects it affects taxpayers. It affects our entire educational system, and so these are really, really important issues. So that is just my sort of very quick overview of kind of what this campaign that's happened in Ohio over the last 5 years, what they've been able to accomplish, and how it sort of started with COLA but expanded to much more than that, and very successfully worked to get representation on the pension funds as well. So I'm going to just stop there. I know, Calvin, you want to move to questions.
Great, thanks, Melanie. I'm going to skip questions briefly. We're running a little bit behind time, and I want to give Roger a chance to speak before we hit 1:30. So we've heard about a legislative overview of the WEP GPO, which affects all of your Social Security benefits. Moving on to the next leg of the proverbial three-legged stool, we've heard about COLAs and how our pensions, which are extra important to our members in states where not everyone pays into Social Security, can be effective, and how we love Elizabeth Jones and Julie Sellers in Ohio, and we've had great activists working in Texas to win a 13th check for their system down there. So now a lot of the questions that have been coming in the chat have been about how do I personally get active, and how do I take actions as an individual that can help move forward this issue of windfall elimination provision and government pension offset. So I'd like to introduce Roger Boudreau. Roger is a retired AFT member and the president of the AFT Rhode Island Retirees chapter. He also represents the Alliance for Retired Americans Northeast. region, and Roger is involved with a national movement of activists who do work on the windfall elimination provision and government pension offset repeal. So Roger, hopefully your audio issues are taken care of, or can you join us and tell people a little bit about the work that you all do on the task force?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I don't see my photo on there, but if that's not important, it's not important to me. I'll begin by saying that in May of 2020, just as the pandemic was beginning to reach its height, a group of folks who were mostly tied to the Alliance for Retired Americans, Bette Marafino in Connecticut, John Penorio in Rhode Island is the president of my chapter here, where I serve as vice president, and some folks from Massachusetts, folks out west, socialsecurityfairness.org, Bonnie Seidel, Susie Dixon, who was mentioned with California RTA. About a dozen of us got together to start working on this, knowing that in the 116th Congress, we wouldn't get very far with the members of Congress in place at the time, but with some hopes for a 2020 election, which, as it turned out, answered our prayers with a record turnout and a group in the 117th Congress that we knew we could work with. So as we evolved over time from that dozen or so members to now more than 50 members who attend weekly meetings, there are at least 35 to 40 folks attending on a weekly basis. Obviously, schedules prevent some people from attending every single week, but they include folks who are also affected, like the Polish-American Strategic Initiative. Those are people who worked in foreign countries who are Americans, who receive their pensions from foreign countries and are affected by the windfall elimination provision, as well as all of the kinds of public employees that we've referenced earlier in today's discussion. And so as we evolved the task force over summer, fall, and winter, that led us eventually to a point where, collectively working together, we were able to get enough co-sponsors on HR 82 that Meg Stockhausen updated us on earlier. It would never have gotten to that point, but for the task force and its members working with their respective organizations to get co-sponsors onto that bill, which now I believe stands at about 300. The discharge petition, which Meghan also referenced earlier, is not something that we understand we're likely to get through because it involves bucking leadership and Speaker Pelosi. However, the lame duck session is going to be important, as Meg indicated as well. We eventually, as 22 approached, got to a point where we were solidified and unified enough and have been cooperating enough to begin to plan a lobby day, and at which point on May 18th, we met actually on the 17th to finalize our plans. On the 18th, we had scheduled lobby visits with our legislators. We had a lobby rally on Capitol Hill at noontime that day. We had speakers, Representative Larson from Connecticut, a couple of folks from my delegation in Rhode Island. There were a number of legislators, in addition to a bunch of personal stories told by members of the task force or people who were related to their organizations about how adversely impacted they've been by the WEP and or the GPO. And that allowed us to begin to move forward towards the summer, when the consensus calendar was scheduled with HR 82. They tried to play some games with that. Initially, when we reached the threshold, we immediately jumped into action collectively to fight back on that, to make sure that the process went forward as it was designed to do. And eventually, the Ways and Means Committee heard the bill on the 20th of September, after it was originally filed on the 15th for the consent calendar, 15th of July, excuse me. And so we are where we are now, basically, as Meg brought us up to date earlier in today's presentation. It's all going to depend now on what happens November 8th. The lame duck session could lend itself to some significant progress on this issue, or not. And so I'm going to encourage everybody on the call today, on the presentation, to find 10 people in your contact list on your phone and text them, and make sure, if they haven't already done so, that they get out to vote and vote for those candidates who are going to help us on this issue. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Roger. And thank you to all of our panelists today. So we are past 1:30 now, so I think we're going to wrap this up. I just want to let everyone know that we received a lot of questions, and we don't have time, unfortunately, to answer all of them right now. But for those of them that we didn't get to answer, we will make sure to resend an answer to anybody who submitted a question. A lot of really important information here. I just want to echo what Roger said. Right now, we have an election coming up in 2 weeks. And the most important thing we can do if we want to see this legislation pass and we want to see this issue taken on is to get out there and vote for candidates who are good on public education, good on our issues as union members, and good on senior benefits and retirement security. So we do have some information here, Chris, if you're able to put up the slide with that information. We have some phone banking opportunities for everyone, which you can see in the chat there. go.aft.org/volunteer. Pretty easy to remember, go.aft.org/volunteer. You can go there and see all of our live phone banking opportunities. There's many that can work with your schedule, some in the afternoon, some in the evenings. People from the West Coast can do it, people from the East Coast, and everywhere in between. This first QR code, if you have your phones on you, you can scan all volunteer opportunities. That goes to the same page. And the two in the middle are for Hustle. So Hustle is our peer-to-peer texting application that AFT uses. We have a Hustle campaign that kicked off this Friday, just this past Friday, the 28th. So it's fresh, and there's training opportunities still coming up. So if you're interested, I highly recommend you go to this barcode in the middle. If you scan it with your phone camera, it'll open up the link, and you can sign up to be interested, to send text messages, to get out the vote for November 8th election. And there's also a training that you can sign up for on the right. We will include all of this information in the follow-up email, as well as if we have the video loaded and uploaded, we can include that. We may do that in a second follow-up email if it takes a long time. And then we will also be setting a date for the second webinar that I mentioned at the top of this hour. And we will get that information out to everyone. And hopefully those who are not able to attend today can attend at the next time. So thank you everyone for attending. I hope you found this useful. Like I said, we will get the answers to all of those questions out. Thank you again to our panelists. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, everyone.